We're very happy today. We have such a very special guest with us. Her name is Pat. And Pat is going to share with us how she was delivered from alcoholism, sexual abuse, and a strong spirit of hatred. Pat, welcome to Healing Miracles.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm glad you could be here today.
Yes. Joan, my story goes like this. I was born during the Depression in 1931, and I was born dead, and they pulled out a pan of water underneath the icebox, and they threw me in that, and I revived. And I had a pretty bad childhood with poverty, and my mother was a drinker. She would go out of the house when my father would leave for work, and she would go across the street to the bars. This seemed to be a factor in my mother's life, that she definitely liked men and she liked to drink. And as a result, she left my father many times during their marriage and took me to many different towns, Conneaut, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and different places, where she would be taking up with different men. And on many occasions, Joan, she would leave me with these men, and she would be out partying someplace. And one of these men that she left me with was in Conneaut. He was a blind man. And when my mother would go off for the evening, this man would take me in his bedroom and do many terrible things to me that are too terrible to mention. And this seemed to be a pattern for me. It just seemed that my mother would leave me with one different man, or maybe a couple sometimes, or sometimes she would leave me with a woman. And she would go out into these taverns with these men. And I soon learned that this was part of life, I guess, that men are supposed to do things to you and touch you. And I didn't really know that it was wrong, although I felt it was. And as I got older, I often saw my mother with many men, and one in particular was a man who she met at her school. She went to St. Elizabeth's in Olean, and this man I had seen at her home many times. And after my mother passed away, this man got in contact with me, and he invited me to come out and visit him at his rectory, in which I did. And he had promised me a lot of things, that he was going to do a lot of good things for me. And he had heard that my father had abused me as a child and had sexually molested me. And I told him about what had happened. And he kind of downed my father and said that he knew a lot of things that were going on in my life, but he was helpless to help me. But that now he would help me, now that my mother was gone and my father was gone and I was alone with the children, that he would help me now. And I was invited to come out with my children to a party, which I did. And this man took us around this little small town in New York here and showed us many houses. He was going to put me up in a house and send the children to nice schools, and he was going to help me financially. And I was so grateful for this man. I thought, oh, God, this must be a wonderful man. He's going to do all these wonderful things for me. Well, after the party started and he knew I drank all my life, he sent the children outside and he told them to go out and play, and he made me a drink, and we were sitting around, and he had some steaks cooking, and he brought out a bowl of salad, and he kept feeding me drinks. And of course I drank anything he'd give me, because I had drank for most of my life from the time I was 18. And he asked me to come over and look out at the window, and he said, "There, I want to show you a tree I had planted." So I walked over to actually it wasn't a window, it was a sliding door. And the children had just gone outside, and they were playing out there, and I looked at this beautiful tree that he had transplanted. And as I'm standing there, this man put his hands up my dress and on my body. And I was pretty upset. I thought, boy, the same old merry-go-round. And I asked him to please take me home. I said, I want to go home now. And he was quite surprised. He said, you mean to say you don't like that? And I said, no, I hate it. I said, please take me home, and I started to cry. Well, he proceeded to get the children, and The kids wanted to know why I was crying, and I said, well, because we have to go home and we're not going to have a party. So he put us in his car and took us back to Buffalo. And my hatred for this man was so intense that I couldn't sleep nights thinking of how I was going to get even with him. Well, he proceeded to call me on the phone and told me that, that things could be all right, that, we could still be friends. So he asked me to come out again to see him. And so this time I didn't take the children and I went out. And he told me that if I wanted to be nice to him, he could be good to me. He said, you don't have much money and you have the children and you're having hard times. He said, I'll make it worth your while if you want to come. That was the housekeeper's day off. And that I could come out there every Thursday and be nice to him, and he would take care of me. And which I agreed to, because my hatred for this man was so great that I thought, there's no feeling for me in this. I'll just do it my idea. So I would go out there every Thursday to see this man, and I would have sex with him. And first of all, he would have drinks for me there. I would have all the drinks I wanted. And I usually had about 5 or 6 drinks before I could even look at them. And then after our sexual encounter, he would bring me back to Buffalo. And this went on for 7 years. And in that time, I was able to buy a lot of nice things for my children. I had no qualms about it. It mattered to me nothing what I was doing. Just another thing. I've done it all my life. What's the difference? So anyway, about this time, it was 1975, I met a man. I was working in the bars, and I was a barmaid, drinking every day, 7 days a week. What did I care about anything? So I met this real nice man, Hank. He started coming to the bar, and he was kind of a nice man, and he seemed a little different than the rest. Kind of liked to play the horses, but he was a nice-spoken, soft-spoken man, and we became acquainted, and we got married. My kids were all grown up, and I was alone, and so I married this nice man. He was nice. And I then immediately stopped my encounter with my friend. I never went to see him again. And the hatred that I had for this man, though, was intensified by not seeing him. And I would sit up nights writing him letters and telling him what I thought about him and what I wish would happen to him. I'm sure many times I told him I wished he'd go to hell. And my husband knew all about my encounter with this man, and he accepted the fact that it was my past, and I no longer went there, and he knew that. He knew that in his heart. So it was about this time that we were driving down a street, and there was a great big cemetery there, and I was thinking about death and dying, and wondering what was going to become of me. I was surely going to go to hell. And about this time, this man died. He was up in years, and he passed away. And there was a great big article in the paper about him. And I remember coming up the stairs that day after I got the paper, and I was so happy that this man had died. And I had told my husband, isn't it wonderful now? He's in hell. He's in hell. He's burning for what he's done, especially what he's done to me. And we were driving by the cemetery that day, and I looked in, and I don't know why, but I was thinking to myself, how do I know he's in hell? Maybe he said he was sorry. I think someplace along the way somebody said all you have to do is say you're sorry, and you can be forgiven. And how do I know he's in hell? I said, Hank, how do I know he's in hell? Maybe he's not. Maybe he said he was sorry. And this was the beginning of my thinking that maybe there was something besides hell for me. And it was about this time that my husband, Hank, got sick. He had had a slight stroke, and I was so drunk all the time I didn't even know this poor man was sick. And he come up the stairs this one day, and he said to me, Pat, he said, I just can't help you anymore. He said, I've been picking you up off the floor 2 and 3 times a day. He said, honey, I just can't do it anymore. He said, I'm sick. And I said to him, well, who needs you? Who needs you? I don't need you. I got along before I met you. I don't need you. I said, get out of here. I don't need you. And he looked at me with kind of a shocked expression. And he went out the front door, and he slammed that door with such force that everything shook. And I thought, you slammed the door on me? Who are you? And I went in the bathroom, and I looked in the mirror, and I think for the first time in my life, I saw what I had become. I was a pitiful looking thing. I weighed 250 pounds. My lips were all swollen up. My eyes were just cracked. They were so swollen from booze. 7 days a week I drank, from morning till night. And then I'd come home, sleep another couple of hours, get up and go back downstairs to the bar. I lived over a bar. And I ran in my bedroom and I fell on my knees. And my son had been sending me this little poem called Footprints. And every time he would send it to me, I'd rip it up and say, oh, what is he getting religious on me? And I'd throw it away. And then one time in the mail came this little package. And sure enough, here it's this little Footprints poem. And over the back of my bed there was a nail, and I shoved it up on that nail, and I said, oh boy, he is getting religious. So I'm on my knees there, and I'm crying, and I'm crying. I'm crying out to somebody to help me. And I looked at that little poem, and it was like a little neon sign. I read, it said, my precious, precious child, I love you. And I cried, and I cried, and I cried. I said, who could love this wicked woman, this horrible, wretched, drunken woman? Who could love me? And I put my head down, and the jukebox downstairs was roaring. The floor vibrated from the sound of the jukebox. And there was 2 windows in my bedroom, on my side of the bed, and they were over there, 2 windows. And I'm crying, and I'm crying, and I'm crying out to God, anybody help me, I'm so tired. I'm so tired of being sick. I'm so tired of being drunk. Help me, help me. And all of a sudden, it became so quiet in that room. There wasn't a sound. And all of a sudden, those 2 windows, like a beam of light, came through there so quick that it filled the whole room. And a voice. People say, no, you didn't hear a voice. But I heard a voice. And that voice said, Patricia, Patricia, I have been waiting for you to come to me for so long. Patricia, don't take another drink. And I looked up at that ceiling where the voice came from. And I said, no, Lord, I won't. I won't. And I jumped up off the floor, and I went out in the kitchen, and there was the 3/4 of a bottle of whiskey still left, because this was early in the morning. And I dumped it down the sink. And I came back in the bedroom, and that bed was soaked with tears. I was so broken. I was so broken from my life and what I had become. But something had changed. In that second, the light was gone, and I could hear the jukebox again playing. But something happened in those few seconds, and I sat down on the couch to contemplate what had happened to me. And for the first time in my life, I had no hatred for anyone. And I was amazed. I had just dumped the whiskey down the sink. And that would have been a terrible thing. If that would have happened, if anybody else would have done that, I probably would have murdered them. But I had no desire for a drink. And when Hank came home later that day, I was sitting there, and he said to me, what's happened to you? I said, I really don't know. But I said, something happened to me, and I told him. And I said, you know, I'm not going to take another drink, because that was his command. And he said, who? I said, God. And so that was the beginning of my walk with the Lord. I was 58 years old and had drank 41 years. The 17 years I was married to this man, I drank every single day. I worked in the bar. I was a barmaid. I had easy access, and this poor man was working, and I was buying booze with his money. And another thing I noticed is that I was very, very sick. I was throwing up 4 and 5 and 6 times a day because I had cirrhosis of the liver. I had a big lump here under my breast. My liver was shot. I mean, I was drinking a quart of booze a day. And I had seen 3 friends of mine die with cirrhosis of the liver. And blood pours from every opening, their mouth, their ears, their nose, everything. And I touched my stomach, and that lump was gone. And I never craved another drink from that day on, except one time. And that was after the death of my great-granddaughter. The funeral was over, and I was going home, and about a week before my great-granddaughter died, I was given a tape by a lady in my church. And I have a great big old bag that I put everything in, and I threw this tape in that bag, and I didn't think no more about it. And the night of her funeral, the funeral was over, and everybody had left the house, and my daughter said to me, "Mom, we're all going to have something to drink, so you go." So I lived across the street from my granddaughter, and I was going up the steps with this big bag, and I got up there and I threw that bag on the bed, and I'm all undressed, and I thought I'd just sit on the couch there and read for a bit, and I had that taste. Oh, could I taste that drink? They're going to drink over there. And I thought, gee, I think I'm just going to go over for one more drink. Just one drink. It won't hurt me. And I started to get undressed, and I was going to get dressed and go across the street. And I looked down on the bed, and there's this tape that Josephine had given me about 8 or 9 days ago. So I stuck it in the radio on the back of my bed, and I started listening to this beautiful. And I sat on the bed and I put my head down, and gee, what a beautiful song. It said just what I felt, how I was feeling. And the next thing I know, I woke up and the song was over. I had fallen asleep. I thought it was only about 5 minutes. And I looked across the street. I could look from my window right into her window. It was all dark. And I said, I know where they went. They went down to the corner. They all went down there to drink. And I looked at the clock. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. My God, isn't he wonderful? He knocked me out because he knew, and I knew, that I could not just take one drink. I would have never stopped. First time in my life I had a peace about me that nobody could understand, the peace. My children, my friends, my so-called friends in the bar didn't know what had happened to me because I just didn't want to drink anymore. I had no desire. The total desire for drinking was gone. The hatred that I had for this man, for my mother, and for all the people that have hurt me was gone. It was gone. Totally gone. There was just a different person sitting on that couch when my husband walked in. I was not Pat. I was now Patricia. I was not a Patsy anymore. And it so happened that during this time that someone had told me that there was a radio station on that had Christian programs on all day long. And I went out and I bought 3 radios, one for the parlor, one for my bedroom, and one for the kitchen. And I found this little WDCX program, and I started listening to it. It was just a new experience in walking with the Lord, getting into the Bible, and not having that horrible, horrible life again. As I was saying, listening to WDCX, and by the way, that's 99.5 if you ever want to turn it on. It was such an influence in my walk because I was listening to Bible studies, Chuck Swindoll and Charles Stanley, and just wonderful, wonderful pastors teaching the Word. And then I got into watching TCT, Channel 49 television, and that was on all day. It was just wonderful. It was like God knew right where I should turn in, and I just consumed it morning, noon, and night. I couldn't get enough. I had all kinds of Bible studies going on, and in between that, I'd shut the radio off and turn the TV on, and it just enriched me with my walk. Then when I was working at TCT, I was working there, taking over food, and I started cooking over there and doing little things, cleaning out the refrigerator, and go over there and just doing little things that needed to be done. They decided that they were going to make the studio bigger, and so they asked me if I would come over and help out with. So I love to cook, by the way. So they had a little small studio there, and they wanted to make this great big huge studio, and hundreds of people came from all over to help in this production. And I got the kitchen, that was mine, And I would go in there and I would cook for the men, and I'd make coffee, and I'd wash dishes and make sandwiches and do all kinds of things. And one day while I was there, I was asked if I would come for the dedication of this room. The room was all done. It was months in doing, but the room was done now, and they were going to have a farewell party and say goodbye to all the people that had helped. And they asked me if I could come in this December 7th and 8th and put the ham out and cheese and help serve food to the people that came. And I said, sure, I'd be glad to. And there was a little fellow there that I had seen him there on several occasions, kind of a gruff-looking guy. I mean, always standing there with his arms folded, and he looked like he just had some problems. I found out that his name was Les. That's all I knew about this man, that his name was Les. So he came in on the 7th with his mother, and they sat down and watched the performance, and then they left. And then tomorrow night would be the 8th, would be the final day that everybody would come. And we'd all get together, and the production would be done, and the dedication of the room, and I was all excited. I got dressed and went down, and I'm out there in the kitchen rolling up ham and cheese, and I saw this Les come in, and oh boy, he's all dressed up. I said, boy, he must have rented a suit. And he came in the kitchen, and he sat down, and I made him a sandwich and poured him a cup of coffee, and he was very polite. He said, gee, that's very nice. He said, it's been a long time since anybody's done anything like this for me. And I said, well, Paula told me that you lost your wife. I said, I lost my husband, so I said, I know how you're feeling. And gee, tears started to come to his eyes, and I went to put my finger on his cheek to tell him, you know, everything's going to be all right. And all of a sudden, all the pain that this man had in his body, the pain in his heart, and his feeling loss for his wife, and the pain he was going through, it went from him right into me. And I was in love with this man in like 2 seconds. I don't know, this has to be God's kind of love. And I went home, and I had this man on my mind. I was totally in love. It was just a different kind of love than I had ever known. And I got home, and I'm thinking, oh, I can't call him. What would he think if I called him? So I'm sitting on the phone, and I'm dialing the phone. I'm dialing. And he answered, and I said, hi. I said, Les, this is Patricia, the cook from DCT. And he said, gee, it's unusual for me to hear the phone, because I had the machine going here. And he said, I'm surprised I heard the phone. So we start talking, and we ended up talking 4 hours. I couldn't believe it. And we had a lot of things in common, and he loved the Lord. And he said to me, I think I'll come to your church and see you Sunday. And I said, oh, would you? And he said, yeah, I think so. So I hung up the phone, and I'm all excited, and the phone rang again. He said, well, why am I going to wait till Sunday? He said, why don't I come and see you tomorrow, which would have been a Saturday. And I said, gee, great. Come and see me. So I hung up the phone, and I started cleaning my house, and I decided what I was going to have to eat. I thought, well, I made out a little list. I make roast beef and potatoes and coffee, and I was so excited. A man is going to come and visit me. I was so excited. So the next day, I had the house all cleaned up, and I'm watching for him to come, and I'm looking for this old jalopy car. And all of a sudden, up pulls this little red sports car, and out he jumps, opens up the bag, and comes up the stairs 2 at a time. And I got to tell you something cute. Guess what he brought me for a gift? A bag of onions. And he said, well, you're a cook, aren't you? I said, yeah. So we sat, and we had long talks, and he took me for a ride. He brought me out to his home, which is out in Sanborn, New York. And I walked in, and it's a little farmhouse. It almost reminded me of the one that I stayed at when I was a child. And he said to me, could you be happy here? And I looked around, and I said, no, I don't think so. Everything was too neat. I was not a neat person, but he was. And he took me home that night, and he said to me, I'll see you in church tomorrow. And I said, good. So he left, and he got home. He called me again. He said, you know, he said, we have so many things in common. He said, you know, he said, I think that we might be good friends. I said, oh, I hope so. So the next day he'd come to church, and everybody in the church was pointing, there's Patricia, Patricia, Patricia. She's got a friend. So we went out that afternoon, and they were supposed to take me to dinner. And we got to this restaurant and the place was closed. And I said, oh, gee, what are we going to do now? He said, well, I'll tell you what we could do. He said, we could get married. And I said, what? He said, yeah. He said, would you marry me? Now, I only started talking to him on the 8th of December. And we got married on the 14th of December. You talk about a fast marriage. And I just knew that this is a man that was going to be everything I ever wanted in a husband. He loved the Lord. And we got married, and we came out here to live, and it's just been wonderful.
My name is Darlene, and I am so excited to tell you about the Healing Miracles Anointed Prayer Book. A few years ago, the Holy Spirit told the hostess and co-producer of the Healing Miracles TV program, Joan Abel, to put together a book of prayers. The result was this beautiful anointed prayer book. Not a single prayer became a part of this book until the Holy Spirit gave His approval. There are over 90 prayers and illustrations in this book, covering almost every conceivable subject. The book starts out with prayers of encouragement. Let me remind you of John 14:14, which reads, "Whatever you ask in the name of Jesus Christ, that will I do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If ye shall ask anything in my name, I will do it." All the prayers in this book are very, very powerful. And remember, this book was inspired by the Holy Spirit. The book ends with an illustration of how much God our Father, Yeshua, loves us. And if you need a miracle, you need to be praying these prayers. For a love gift, this wonderful anointed prayer book can be yours. Thank you, and remember, our God is a God of healing miracles.